come once again to discuss things.
Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions the geeky gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by Ryse's educational system, except not at all. I'm Sid Partu, joining me today is...
Geek for fun.
Yay.
Good morrow.
Yay. So we're here for another character discussion. Alfie has picked our character. What character are we discussing this time?
Today we are talking about the person who has quite a few names, but I'm only gonna name the one. That is the Monkey King himself, Sun Wukong.
Indeed. So what made you want to talk about Sun Wukong?
Goku. It's just why I just wanted to talk about. No, I feel like he's a very interesting discussion because I've noticed when I was looking through your past History Month videos, I saw a lot of Hercules, I saw a lot of Zeus, I saw a lot of just Western, European, and all these different kinds of heroes. We did Thor last time. All these kind of like great heroes from the West. And I was really curious because I think Sun Wukong being generally accepted to be like the Hercules of China and Japan and all of the East in a way, that big heroic figure, I think it's interesting to get into the big major differences in an approach of storytelling with that, and how as a character he shaped how the West views superheroes today.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that regard. Yeah, it's one of those things where when I learned about mythology and stuff, I learned Greek myths. I learned, almost exclusively Greek myths. There's, of course, Bible, Christian myths and stuff, too, but Greek myths are kind of like the bread and butter, especially because so much stuff is derived from them. But yeah, it's weird that you don't hear more about these stories kind of growing up, and I think that's just because cultures tend to focus only on themselves. One thing that always annoyed the hell out of me is I took a world history class in high school, and it was history of Europe. It's very... In Western societies, we focus on the history of the West, and I even then, it was a history of Europe, but, we only talked about Spain as it was relevant to the discovery of America. And so it's one of those things where it's things get very particularly focused. So you never really learn too much about Chinese or Japanese history unless you take specific courses on that. And so it's just hard to get into that mythological world, I think. From a Western thing, because you have to intentionally seek it out. You don't really have many sources of it coming to you in pre-packaged formats, I guess.
Yeah, and that makes it hard for characters like this to be able to get the source of it, because even though translations for say the Greek myths are still you're never going to get the original source, but because they've been studied so much and are so generally accepted in just general education systems and all of that, you do normally get a much greater sense once it's in that system of what the actual intentions are. With something like Journey to the West, because you do kind of have to go out of your way to read it, you're not always certain what the best translation is. Mm-hmm. And that could lead to some differences. Again, the whole name thing, Sun Wukong has got 30 different names.
Oh yeah?
And all of them they all translate roughly to the same kind of thing. And most of this is just because he's such a well-renowned character. He's been done in different languages. But Son Goku, Sun Wukong, Son Gukong, Sun Gukong, Sei Hyung Weng, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing most of these right, but the list goes on, but all of them do genuinely mean uh, the sage equal to heaven, or aware of emptiness, or something to do with the Buddhist interpretation of heaven, and like that idea of being one with the universe and kind of being empty.
Interesting. Um, so when you picked this, I did actually do just a little bit of research on the character. I started watching Overly Sarcastic's videos because they do a pretty good job of just kind of breaking down a myth or a story or something. They did a really good series on HP, or really good video on H.P. Lovecraft. And so I watched a bunch of their videos, and they did like I want to say like an 8-part series on Sun Wukong and just the stories of the journey to the West. I'm like, okay, and we're going to skip the filler and just focus on the really good stories. And they started calling it Journey to the West Kai, and I cracked up at that. But they did like voice acting. There was a little bit of art and stuff here and there, so that was really cool and really fun. Why don't you take us somewhere, though? What's like some of the stuff that you think defines or really makes Sun Wukong what he is?
I think the biggest key to that is, if you look at like his journey, he very much does go on like how the West sees like the hero's journey, but in a way which is almost entirely unique from when he started and then influenced things after him. Simply because it's all from such a character place. He's never given a destiny. He's never given the idea that he's meant to reach this place, or he's meant to go to this thing simply because of who he is. He really just starts off as just a monkey who was impulsive and then found his way, stumbled into power, and then as a result became so much of a problem that he had to get a destiny and be incorporated into the grand mythos of everything. But I do really appreciate, it's almost as if Hercules wasn't Zeus's son. Hercules was just a really strong mortal that Zeus had to kind of like take it just to stop causing problems. Like, that's a really unique mythic hero kind of sense, in the same way that a lot of Japanese media is about, and Chinese media as well, rejecting fate, right? Rejecting the destiny you've given and overcoming it. And I think Sun Wukong is where a lot of that comes from, because he is that character who's all about his own actions, his own decisions. And really, for better or worse, it makes a character in a way you don't normally get this early in media, in literature, because everything he does is bratty, impulsive, but sometimes he can be kind, sometimes he can be charitable, and you just get this really fleshed out idea of what this person would be like to be around, which as much as a fan as I am about Norse mythology, it's hard to, like, in the texts themselves, it's hard to get a gauge of what Thor would actually be like as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying there, because so many of the characters in myth, they do just change because so much of it's like an oral tradition, and so sometimes Zeus is a complete idiot, and sometimes he's like this very wise, king and stuff. And that kind of just goes and changes and it evolves in time. But Wukong is not from a single source, but he's from a smaller range of sources, I'd say. Do you think that's a fair point?
Mm-hmm. And there's even some speculation of if he is like a foreign invention, simply because of like the dating back mythologized monkeys, and like specifically like white monkeys and all of these kind of things. People have been researching like, some of these came from other countries and places like that maybe they got brought over, or again, it's like one of those things where everything kind of led to this this one idea being the zeitgeist, and then becoming like and defining everything. But there was certainly a train of thought that led to this.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so you get a fuller sense of the character because it's coming from less sources, which I guess I'm interested to kind of find that out, because as I was reading up on him, it seemed like he was a relatively late addition and like some of his stuff was kind of felt retroactive. Because one thing I found interesting is he's essentially mortal, and then he kind of just repeatedly breaks into heaven, and so you've got this sense of like very very core to his story in the early days of it, that heaven, the gods, all that stuff is already pre-established and is necessary for his story to take place, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Which, you mentioning, oh, maybe there's like a bit of a foreign influence, kind of makes me wonder if he was a late addition to the mythology, in an interesting way.
It definitely played. This is where we need to tie back to the last couple of episodes and be like, where's the receipts so we can prove how young Sun Wukong actually is?
Right? I don't know, it's just really interesting in that regard, the way that a character can kind of come into the myth. But you did mention that he does have a very core character with just this incredibly impulsive monkey, and yet that keeps kind of working out for him, except when it doesn't.
His failure to win ratio is leaning more heavily to win, so his bad behavior continually gets rewarded.
Right. And it's so funny because other myths are just so wrapped up in like allegory and moral of the story, learn your lesson kind of things, that for Sun Wukong to just constantly do the wrong thing and just be able to brute force his way through it and get rewarded in the end anyway is really hilarious. Like, I just find that very amusing that he can kind of just do whatever he wants, damn the consequences, it'll all work out for him in the end.
Yeah, because he's got that insane level of strength, even among the gods he's around, which is a unique... Normally the highest level of power isn't really reserved for the main mythic hero. They only have to overcome things. Sun Wukong is generally the most busted guy outside of the Buddha itself.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense, because just through his journeys, he encounters fights, but they're never hard, and the funny thing is, the only fights he struggles with are the ones where there's like a gimmick that like breaks him a little bit. Like, oh, he's the strongest ever, but he can't fight underwater because he doesn't know how to swim, or something like really really ultra specific like that. Like almost like as these stories and myths were being told, people needed to create a kryptonite.
Yeah, this is already leading into that setting of, again, I think this is probably, I don't even want to say like a direct influence, but again, this kind of cultural world membrane that kind of grows off ideas even if they come from completely separate cultures, like how everyone kind of comes up with their own ideas of dragons without ever actually having to interact and meet. I think maybe that is kind of just an example of the human experience. When we create these incredibly strong mythic heroes, we don't want to weaken them, so we just find ways to have them be weakened by the conflict of that certain battle. Which, again, if you want to go deeper, because Journey to the West is all about the human mind and overcoming challenges, and this is what you're going to be faced with this day, like the emotional state. Like, Sun Wukong is definitely just an embodiment of human emotions and human willpower, for better and for worse. The idea that on some certain day you're just not feeling it is kind of really fitting and works for that as a weakness, even if you take it to that broad abstract sense.
I think that's a really good point, because it seems that so many of his stories have the same beginning and ending, and even the same middle point, where it's like, he does the thing, and at first his friends don't believe him, and so they kind of chastise him, and then he leaves in a huff, and then his friends realize he was right, and he comes back and saves the day, kind of thing, you know? Like, so many of the stories seem like they're all maybe the same story, and then they just got changed over and over and over again. but they each have just a very slightly different lesson that they're learning each time. So I don't know, there's just something really interesting to that.
It's definitely one of the, I guess maybe in comparison again, because I do think this is like a good way to really get into the character compared to previous episodes we've done. Compare that to, say, a Thor or a Hercules, where they mess up and then have to redeem themselves and learn the lesson. The idea that he's always right, or had the basic idea in the first place, but then doubt, insecurity, paranoia, represented by other characters, kind of brings him down and makes him question his own point, is kind of the moral, right? A lot of this Journey to the West is just trust in yourself, believe in who you are, and understand and be happy with who you are, and that will lead to self-fulfillment. Whereas listening to doubt and insecurity and all of these things are more likely to throw you off your game, because when you're certain of yourself, you are unstoppable. And obviously that can also be a very dangerous line of thought. And I think that is sometimes portrayed by just how much chaos he causes. But as just like a tale and a moral, I do think there is some merit, I guess, in the message. I think isn't trying to portray like just be bullheaded and don't listen to others, but having that sense of self and that self-appreciation is what Sun Wukong's really trying to like portray. Rather than like, say, other stories of myths which believe like surrender yourself to a higher power. Sun Wukong's a very empowering to the people myth.
No, I absolutely think so, and like a lot of other myths are about being less than the gods, about being less than or just naturally wrong. You know, like the idea of like the Adam and Eve myth is just about being like unclean, unworthy of the greatest gifts of heaven, and you've got to struggle through life because you're of your original sin and all this stuff. Whereas Sun Wukong's like, oh look, the gods have a cool thing, I want that, yoink. And then he's eventually punished for that, though it takes long ass time, and then he's humbled for quite a long time. He's under a mountain for what, like 5,000 years or something like that?
Like 500 years. 500
years, okay. He spends 500 years under a mountain, and then when he's given the opportunity to go off on a new adventure or whatever, like to recover from that, he almost immediately doesn't learn his lesson. They have to devise another thing to kind of keep him there anyway. Which is just fascinating. So you have the idea that unchanging character, and I mean, to his credit, he was able to do whatever the hell he wanted for hundreds of years before he only had to spend 500 years under a mountain, and that was it.
So it is one of those, I guess, I'm curious to see how well he would stand alone as just a separate character, because although a lot of Journey to the West is spent on building his backstory up and all of that, he is part of an ensemble cast, and I do think that kind of helps balance that single character trait out a little bit, because he's by no means one-dimensional, because he has different mood swings and he goes and does different things, and he regrets, he has guilt, he has happiness, he has rage, like everything, the full gambit is experienced through him, very much intentionally. But at the same time, having him around characters who are more tame or more deceptuous, or some more just completely brute force, not really trying to be as tricky as he is, because although he's quite powerful, Sun Wukong's also kind of a trickster god archetype, where he wins a lot of his hardest battles just by completely outwitting his opponent, which I really appreciate. And then you get like all of that combined into one journey, where it does really kind of feel like the typical, again, Journey to the West probably inspired so much, but it's a cast, right? It's like a cast you've seen in every single adventure movie you've ever been in. Like he's the young, not even young, but like he's the rambunctious hero who's got all the talent, but maybe he needs to sit down for a second. And then you got the old master who puts him in his place, but isn't as confident, and all of that stuff kind of really plays off. I mean, you can just saying the cast archetypes, not just Dragon Ball, but literally almost every single anime ever made really comes off with that.
Yeah, and that was something I kind of wanted to talk about, because as I was listening to these stories of, Journey to the West, Sun Wukong, like, I'd always heard, oh, Goku's based off Sun Wukong, and I'm like, yes, I guess I see it with, like, the tail and stuff. I guess that makes sense. But really, after the Pilaf saga, there's not a ton of, like, direct parallels between him and Goku from what I was seeing.
Yeah.
There's just kind of like there's like the formula, the archetype, and then after that, it really kind of goes off and starts to be its own thing. So I was really surprised by that. I don't know. What do you think about the like how much of Goku is truly based off the Monkey King?
I think a lot of it comes down to character. Is the biggest thing, and not even just like appearance, because one of Goku's scrap designs, he was just going to be an actual monkey boy, but then they just brought him back to just the tail and the wild hair. But in how Goku acts as this kind of in the moment, good at heart, but probably needs some helping hands around him, he can cause more trouble than he means to sometimes. It's quite funny how timely this is, because we had a recent conversation with some people in our Discord about just Goku as a hero and all of that. And the same can be applied to Sun Wukong, is they both kind of have this very good-natured but also severely flawed aspect to them. And that's the thing I think sticks the most around. I think that's the thing, I don't want to speak for the man, but I can gauge that's what Toriyama was probably most interested in exploring with a protagonist. Is the idea of, because he's all about the gags and everything, and even then he's about subverting expectations, so having his hero be someone who is always going to be good, but sometimes makes mistakes simply because of how they're impulsive or how their personality's wired, I think is probably the biggest example. In terms of differences, I might even say early on Goku is kinder than Sun Wukong. Wukong's kind of selfish. He likes shiny things, he likes taking things from other people. Goku never really has that throughout the entire series. He's always about that self-improvement. So if anything, Wukong's closer to how you would imagine Goku before he met Grandpa Gohan, and all of, like, maybe like in Kakarot kind of standards. Because Wukong kind of has this journey he goes on when he eventually receives enlightenment, and eventually does get trained by, once the journey to the West ends, he receives enlightenment and becomes the great sage equal to heaven, and kind of gets over his character flaws a little bit. That's closer to Goku. How he is at the end of that, when he finally becomes one with emptiness, is closer to how Goku's journey was portrayed. Which you could take the biggest example post the Pilaf arc is him learning the lesson against Roshi. You could kind of see that to him learning the lesson against the Buddha. The fight isn't really a straight up fight, it's just learning you're not the strongest and there will always be people above you kind of thing, which is something Wukong kind of knows but also doesn't because he keeps winning. But then Goku also keeps winning after that too, so there's a parallel there. I think basically, in short, it's one of those things where there is definitely a direct inspiration, but Goku does become his own thing separate from the myth, but not as much as, say, Superman is separate from, like, say, Moses.
I guess that's an interesting way to look at it. Because when you hear, like, oh, this character's based off this one, you do tend to think, like, oh, their story parallels it. But no, not really. Goku and Sun Wukong kind of go off and become very different characters very quickly, but there is still these core things that are shared between them on a personality level. I do like the point you made about, like, the impulsiveness and the just nature of who they are tends to get them in trouble. I think that's really interesting, because you say that and I immediately think of, like, Goku going off to fight Frieza. and when King Kai makes him promise not to.
Or again, something directly is like Goku going off to fight Tambourine after Krillin dies, like immediately in anger, and he's not thinking, he gets his ass kicked, and he messes up because of it. Or Sun Wukong would totally give Sala Sensu. He'd give him two.
Oh my. I don't even know what you do with that. Oh.
And then you mix that with how he might go the full extent and say, how does Goku react when he's in heaven? Oh yeah, see how he reacts with Zeno. It's exactly how Sun Wukong would be. And all the other gods are like, what the fuck is happening? Which is what happens in Dragon Ball 2. There are definitely examples there to be found, even as late as like Super.
I guess you're right. Again, I don't know much. Like the overly sarcastic series only went so far in the story, so I don't know much about Wukong. After the journey's over, I kind of just know him before and during. From what I was able to dig up on the character,
it's basically the same. It's just again, his character arc ends is because he receives enlightenment, and that's you can't get any better than that. Like he kind of just gets over all his woeful and impulsive and like guiltful insecurities, and eventually just becomes the best Sun Wukong he can be. It doesn't mean he changes. It's just that kind of philosophy of just being aware of self and accepting who you are without doubt and without fear makes him a better version of himself.
Okay, that's really interesting. Have there been any major adaptations of directly of Sun Wukong?
Yeah, there's been quite a few. The sad thing, well, there have been just general movie adaptations. Like there's 3 different movies. One of them's got Jet Li and Jackie Chan in it. But there's been a Journey to the West 2014 film, a 2013 film, a 1994 film, and one of the biggest ones that I probably need to watch because it looks quite cool is Monkey King Hero is Back, which is an animated film that came out in 2015, and apparently it's beloved, and it's probably people think it's really, really good. I haven't seen anything. I've just seen the poster from Wikipedia, and the poster looks great. It looks like a Dragon Ball poster with Sun Wukong staring at a dragon. So I'll have to go check that one out. But he does appear in a lot of direct adaptations for sure. But mostly, he's kind of been relegated to the idea of, specifically if you do want to go to how he's perceived in Western media, he's I don't even know the term for that, but a cameo character, but in terms of not even physically appearing, just being referenced a lot. So in a lot of RPGs, you can get his staff, or you can get his outfit, and it will be referenced as the Monkey King staff or something like that. And that's not even you can get that stuff in Blizzard games. So there's tons of stuff like that. You just I need to be more references and stuff like that. But just looking on the list on Wikipedia, there is quite a lot of just indirect references and appearance wise. Because again, I think that should also be something mentioned. He's got such a great design, even though it's been interpreted in so many different ways. They're all kind of really cool. The tiger sash and the power pole, or whatever, the Nubio, or whatever the actual name for the fingers, and then the magic cloud, and everything just ties together really nicely for him.
Yeah, I totally get that. He definitely seems to have more of a definitive look than a lot of other mythological characters do, which is kind of neat. Because that's one that's just, a lot of myth comes from oral tradition, so what the characters are described to look like varies wildly from person to person, and from audience to audience too, because obviously a storyteller could change details to greatly impact the audience they're telling the story to with each individual telling.
I guess again, you say the Monkey King. he's only gonna really look one way.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what a monkey looks like.
Well, I mean, that's all cool. I guess the reason I asked about adaptations was to see if you had any that you'd recommend to watch for
Recommendations. I actually would probably say the Journey to the West films. A lot of them are no one's like the film, but the perfect idea. One thing I am excited about, and hopefully this doesn't get ended up in development hell, is Neil Gaiman was talking about working on a live-action adaptation of it, which I would just be in love with. That would be fantastic to see what he could do with it. But other than that, it has just been kind of everyone's had a stab at it. I would definitely just again going off the response. The animated one, Monkey King Hero, seems to be the most beloved, from what I'm gauging. And then also, just look up the 3 Journey to the West films. They're not awful. Some of them are better than others, but all of them are kind of just. It's just a really fun world to live in for a little bit. Like a lot of myths have that. Norse is kind of really nihilist. Greek is just super tragic, and like even then, it's kind of like it's the world itself isn't really seen as fun. But the world of Journey to the West is such a full of joy, and people get eaten and everything, but even then it's like kind of in a light way. Like you only get kind of devoured and like
there's like the PG-13 rating of myths.
yeah, right. It's like no one's getting raped.
God. Alrighty. Well, I mean, I'm definitely curious. You definitely got my head stern with your weeby bullshit, so I appreciate that at the very least.
So I mean, there you go. That's this entire dynamic summed up.
Alrighty. Let's see here. Who are we going to talk about next time? Oh, Christ, this gets difficult. You know, I should have thought of this a little bit more ahead of time, but what can I do? I suck. I'm terrible. Oh. Already done an episode on Kratos. Shit. That'd have been a good one. That'd have been a really good one. Damn it. I don't know. I'll think of some bullshit.
I mean, yeah, you know, I'll save that.
Yeah, you save it for yours. I'll think of something. I just put myself on the spot, and I had nothing. I was woefully unprepared. And I could.
So next time on Geeky Gentleman History Month, will Ian find a way to bullshit his way to finding a character in time, or will he leave it to the last minute? Will Alfie ever get the courage to ask out Steve on a date? Find out on the next action-packed episode of Geeky Gentleman History Month.
Until then, I'm the philosopher.
And I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.